that if you're communist China and you wanted to influence the United States, acquire data, corrupt the American people, you would use a social media app just like TikTok to do it.
TikTok probably will be banned within the next week or so. The case is in the Supreme Court. Do you think this was the right decision?
Well, look, the problem with TikTok is that you have an enemy country in communist China that is controlling a social media platform that quite literally millions and millions of Americans see. And the idea that the United States would allow, just with complete access, a foreign country that has stated that it believes itself as an enemy of the United States, total access to the United States and our children so that they can program them politically and socially, that's just common sense, I think. Now, how this actually shakes out, whether or not it will be a total ban, whether it'll be a forced sale to to an American company is a different thing. But it was a necessary common sense thing to do.
So there's two arguments there. There's one about data collection and another about political propaganda, I suppose. Just on the first one, what kind of data do you believe TikTok is collecting on American citizens? And obviously TikTok would argue that all that data is stored in Texas, it's not shared with the Chinese government in any case.
Well, of course, just because it's stored in Texas, it could be stored in Texas right this moment. And the communist Chinese that have a cyber army of some 600,000 men and women could have complete access to it. They have access to things right now in the United States that they have zero control over, right? They would still have some control over whatever data is collected by TikTok and stored in Texas. But just last week, the communist Chinese um, had hacks into our telecom system. There's over a million daily. I mean, think about this for a moment. There's over a million daily cyber incursions into the American banking system that emanate from the PLA and their cyber army, the People's Liberation Army and their cyber unit. So the idea that they think anything is sacred in America, whether it's our telecom data, our telecom usage, our banking system, the idea that they would keep the TikTok data secure is almost laughable under those circumstances, it seems to me.
And what about the data that they're collecting? What kind of data is TikTok collecting?
Well, I mean, mostly I would think it's data based on usage. But once they have an app on your phone, they in theory could penetrate, depending on what kind of phone you have. Of course, they could penetrate um, much of your data on your phone, or at least track the data on your phone on where you're going. And so I think Americans and anybody around the world should essentially believe that if they're using TikTok today, the communist Chinese could see into their world. We don't know exactly what they're doing, but the idea that once you open that portal, as it were, they don't have access is is kind of foolish.
TikTok argues that you're using TikTok and the communist Chinese as a kind of synonym, but TikTok would argue that they are not connected with the Chinese Communist Party, they don't share data with the Chinese government, and that they're essentially independent. They're an independent company.
They can say that, of course, but that doesn't mean that that's true. And any company in communist China today has some intimate relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. No one is free from that. And whether or not TikTok wants to say that they've located much of their management of TikTok to the United States or somewhere else, and that they're completely independent of the Chinese Communist Party is, I think, nonsense. I mean, it is more likely, it seems to me, that TikTok is an active operation of communist Chinese intelligence in order to corrupt the United States. That would seem to me, I can't prove that, and I'm not even trying to prove that. I'm just saying, as a hypothetical, that seems like a more plausible way of thinking about TikTok. Start there. That if you're communist China and you wanted to influence the United States, acquire data, corrupt the American people, you would use a social media app just like TikTok to do it. And we're not even talking now about the content, just the ability to exert influence, monitor, watch what Americans are doing. What arguments do Americans respond to? What do Americans want to buy? What do they want to listen to? What do they want to watch on any kind of media platform?
So it's not the content on TikTok you're concerned about, because your argument sounds like, the Chinese government are trying to promote propaganda on this app to aimed at Americans. Is that not so? So is it the content on TikTok that you're worried about?
Well, look, I think, I'm a father and a grandfather, and so I do worry about what my children and grandchildren are actually looking at. When I was a boy, I'm going to date myself here. People would go outside and play, and they'd grab a football or a baseball and a bat, and they'd go have a game with the kids in the neighborhood. Today, they're sitting in their bedrooms on their phones, scrolling through TikTok and other social media apps, and it seems to be warping their brains. I mean, how many stupid cat videos can you watch? It's a form of, I'll exaggerate the point, it's a kind of form of pornography, if you will. That if we only get our entertainment from sitting in isolation, watching things in, 1 minute or 3 minute snippets that, the content of which could be corrupting of your soul, that can't be a good thing. Which is one reason why communist China does not allow that in their own country. They don't allow children to watch these things in their own country, presumably because they think it is bad for them. It's bad educationally, it's bad even morally, and I hate to even use this word with communist China, but spiritually for their own kids. They think it makes them a worse person to have these kind of apps and sitting around, using them this way. So if the Chinese think that about their own society, we might want to wonder what they think about what they're doing to our society here in the United States or more broadly in the West. And so whether it's America or Great Britain, I think citizens need to understand what kind of content are we feeding our next generation? Will it be content that enriches or content that corrupts?
But isn't that an argument against all social media apps directed at young people, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else it is? Because all of those apps presumably share the same kind of content that you're concerned about that may be corrupting children.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But it's one thing to have a social media company. Look, let me just take a step back. I think parents should be deeply concerned about the kind of things their children are viewing on any social media app, in any book, magazine, television, on any platform. So yes, let's start there. When it comes to a social media platform, we have to be concerned that in fact it could be manipulated by an adversarial or enemy nation. Then it takes it up just another notch. It's one thing to have it done by Instagram, which is controlled by Meta. And it's quite a different thing to have a company whose organizational members have to have some influence being exerted upon them by the Chinese Communist Party. So common sense would dictate you take a hard look at that, which is one reason I think why the TikTok ban came up to begin with. That people were concerned that the communist Chinese could use these to manipulate Americans. And I believe they did in 2020. I believe they do to this very day. And when it comes to that, we ought to be deeply concerned.
And what about Donald Trump's view on this? He seems to be against the ban on TikTok, and this was actually Joe Biden who was the one pushing for this. And I know Republicans are quite split on this issue. In Montana, they attempted to ban TikTok, but then more libertarian Republicans said, no, we shouldn't do this. So where do you see Donald Trump, or how do you see Donald Trump when he becomes president, how is he going to deal with TikTok?
The president had serious concerns about TikTok, but his natural instinct is to have a freedom-based society. And so even though he has obviously very serious concerns about communist China, he wants to come up with some solution that works for everybody. He's a problem solver. in his own mind, I think he thinks there's a way of doing this that doesn't destroy TikTok, that can bring TikTok around. Maybe there can be American ownership of this. Maybe there's a way of doing this where parents can use it responsibly with their kids. You know, his bias is towards freedom and problem solving. So you could see when he's in office a week from now, coming up with some kind of way of solving this.
Thank you for watching this video. If you want to watch more content, please subscribe to our new GBN America YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.